welcome again to the Skillwork Forum. I'm Tim, as always, joined here by my partner, Brett, and we get together and just talk about trends, issues, topics surrounding the skilled trades and those that depend on skilled tradesmen. We focus a lot on the manufacturing space because that's a lot of where our client base and our skilled workers reside. So with respect to the manufacturing industry, Brett, they spend a lot of time measuring stuff. A lot of time talking about efficiency and run times and safety and productivity and throughput and on and on and on. Lots of things to measure in the manufacturing space. They probably invented taking measures and trying to improve productivity as a result of that. So there was a recent article that we looked at that really piqued our interest by NetSuite. NetSuite, those aren't familiar, they've developed probably the leading business end-to-end management software. So they listed 73 potential metrics that you could measure in a manufacturing space. So we thought we'd go through every one of those 73 today, line by now. We're not going to do that. That would put everybody to sleep. Maybe we could do that if you're having trouble with insomnia. But instead, we're going to look at a few that we think are really crucial and focus on three kind of broad categories that we're going to look at. And from those, maybe pick out one or two that we think are important for you in the manufacturing space.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. Sometimes, it's the old, more isn't always better. And so, we're going to get into a little bit of what some of those additional metrics are, but we're going to focus primarily on a handful of metrics that really kind of break down into people, performance, and profit. I sound like I should be doing a message at church,
the three P's,
whatever you pastor people, whatever you call those things.
What do they call alliterations?
So people, performance, and profit. And so if what you're measuring doesn't have an impact on one of those, or in probably most cases in all three of those, I guess we would say you probably should be asking yourself, why are we measuring it? Is it just data overload, or is because those are the things, people, performance, and profit, that really need to. And we would suggest that if you really focus on people and performance, the profit will follow.
Right.
I got to do a shout out to all you manufacturing people, because I've lived in that world. The profit will follow unless your salespeople are giving the product away. And for everybody who's a maintenance manager who's always been convinced salespeople don't really sell, they just give product away, that's for you. But the profit will follow, if you really focus on the things that affect the people and then the things that affect the performance. So that's where we're gonna dial in.
Yeah. So the first one in the category is probably the most important, and it's people. So there's tons of measures for your people, and a lot of you out there have either heard or said, and hopefully you believe it, that your people are your number one resources, or your most important asset are your people, your employees. We agree with that. But how do you measure it? So in one respect, there's like, how are we taking care of our people? There's lots of measures, to measure culture and employee satisfaction, surveys, things like that. But probably the most critical thing to measure inside a manufacturing space is your safety. The number of incidents you have, the number of accidents per the number of employees you have over time. And there's a ratio that you can look at, and what is an acceptable level? Well, obviously everybody strives for zero. We want to have zero, but you want to, I think that the level, if you look at an OSHA site, they would say you want to have no more than 3 per 100 employees, 3 cases per 100 employees over a standard year. So anything below that is great. You're trending in the right direction. Anything above that, we have a safety issue, and safety issues in an environment basically are communicating to your employees that there's maybe a lack of concern for their health and well-being. Do you want them to go home at the end of the day? So good safety practices mean care and concern for employees. Again, a lot of other things you can measure, but that is a key one. So safety incidents is a big metric we'd say you need to be paying attention to.
Yep, no doubt. And so another one, that we would say is people-centric, and that's your turnover rate. So the calculation for turnover rate that most people use is number of separations in a month over average number of employees in a month, and then they'll times that by 100 to come up with a ratio or percentage. And so in the manufacturing space, as Tim, alluded to a bit ago, the majority of the work that we do is in the manufacturing space. Manufacturing probably has one of the higher turnover rates. Now, there are other industries that have high turnover rates as well. The average in manufacturing is around 44%, which, when you think about, that in the context of maybe more of a white collar space or a service industry, depending on what that is, they're going to target, a goal probably closer to 10%.
Right.
So, but truth be told, Tim and I know that we work with a lot of manufacturers that would be happy with 44%.
Yeah, that's right.
That they're really, really struggling, to, when I had my manufacturing business, not so much on the skilled trade side, but in the plant. And this was always a number that always kind of messed with people's head. But, of our new hires, it was not uncommon for us to have 100% turnover rate. Now you had these longtime employees that, type of thing, but when those people that you were hiring multiples to try to keep it up. And so, we've done a whole podcast before on, kind of the cost of retention, versus the investment in retention. I'm not going to dig deep in retaining your employees and there's whole businesses. We've got a good friend of ours who owns a company called Quantum Workplace. I mean, that's his business is about culture and retention and the surveys and to try, because they recognize there's a cost in that if you don't do that.
Yep.
You said it a minute ago, Tim, and it's a very common thing. We don't know that I've ever met a company, and I don't think any of them that we work with that wouldn't say, that their people are their number one asset. You said that a minute ago, but where you got to be careful with managing your culture is if you're not measuring your safety, and if your facility is not a safe place to work, that's going to be pretty known pretty fast. And if your turnover rate is really high, that's going to become known. So first you got to measure them, and then two, you've got to do something about them. You've got to take some action to do it. Otherwise, people will start to say, we talk a game, but we don't really play a game.
Exactly right. It's just lip service. So, yeah, and the flip side of turnover is retention. You mentioned that, Brett. So, if you think about the average retention or the turnover rate in manufacturing is 44%, that means 50%. You're retaining about half your employees. You're losing about half your employees. And finding replacements is we've done entire podcasts talking about the cost of that and how difficult it is. So how can you impact these measurables, people? Well, again, this is not rocket science, but training and upskilling your people is a huge thing. It's crucial to maintain your workforce and to attract the best and brightest. You have to have a plan in place where you have a pathway for them to receive the training and skills necessary to continue to evolve in their career. Talented, trained, experienced people that you have in your workforce, it affects your rate of, we call it a mod rate. Basically, it's your accidental rate, and it impacts your workers' compensation. If you know what I'm talking about, you understand. Higher skilled, talented, trained employees are being challenged and like the culture are going to directly impact that. Safety programs from the top. I used to work for a company that was, I would say, obsessed in the best sense of the word with safety, to where this safety briefing took place every time you had a meeting, a conversation, even at the headquarters when safety was basically make sure your chairs are rolled into the table and there's no extension cords on the floor. It was a culture, and they talked about it all the time, going home safe every day, because it was a very dangerous environment out in the field. So safety, make sure your talent is trained and staffed, and work on your culture. We talk all the time. Peter Drucker, he's a sage of leadership, in the 80s and 90s, and he has a statement a lot of people say all the time that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. That hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, I would say it's even more relevant today than it's ever been. Your newer employees, the things that you do to impact their quality of life at the workforce is more crucial today than it's ever been. And not paying attention to your people and measuring it, you're going to be feeling the pain at the bottom line. So the next category, Brett, is performance.
Yeah. So, there's like we said, there's the people side, and those things get measured. Probably the thing, in the manufacturing world that though probably gets, to be quite honest with you, gets more attention than anything is performance. And so, the definition of performance, refers to the execution or accomplishment of work, acts, feats, etc. In business, usually refers to achievement of your desired goals. So what we'll talk about here in a minute as we kind of pack out how do you measure some of these, but what are you doing to drive the results on a daily, on a shift, on a per line in a manufacturing, and the result, investments that we make in the assets, both the physical assets, but then also the human side or the people we were just talking about. You're making those investments. So again, like I said, whether that's in paying more for high level technicians, paying more for this piece of equipment. We just did a podcast that you'll be able to see out there on smart manufacturing, investments in that automation. And at the end of the day, you're looking to see, are we getting the results that we needed? And we're going to walk through some ways to measure that to see if you are.
Yeah, because if you're not seeing results, the ability to put investment into that, it's ROI. We'll talk about some financial metrics, and that's performance. You're measuring are the inputs we're doing, the changes we're making to our personnel, process, our equipment, driving the bottom line. So some of the key ones that everybody out there is familiar with, these are some of the ones that definitely most in this space would be familiar with, but OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, is a crucial one. That's essentially, what's your performance and quality and availability combined together? What does that number look like? How much of a percentage of time is your plant being productive? Manufacturing quality products as quick as possible with no downtime. So that's where, if you had to look at one measure, that's probably the one key performance measure that you're always going to look at. How do you affect OEE? So in that equation, availability is essentially how much production time as opposed to schedule time to operate. How much is it actually doing what you're investing it to do? How much downtime is it? Availability. So, and again, schedule maintenance isn't included in availability. It's just when it should be running, is it running at its full capacity? How much are you squeezing out of that capability? And it's a benchmark really to compare different lines of facility as well as different, investments in technology, efficiency, personnel, et cetera. So it's a way to gauge or benchmark, is the investment proving to be valuable? It's a common KPI or key performance indicator in a continuous improvement process. You're constantly looking for ways to drive that OEE number to a higher level. And the effectiveness of equipment, how effective is that piece of gear, not just throughput? How effective is that particular piece of gear in your end-to-end process? So, and also part of that equation mentions quality. If you're having to do a lot of rework, even though your throughput is high, if the quality is low, then the overall sum, your OEE, is going to be driven down. So it's got to be quality, efficiency, and throughput together gives your OEE number, which is a huge measure.
Yeah, OEE is a little, like I said, Tim, it's a little bit different than some of the other measures in that, like you said, you are looking for that overall equipment effectiveness, because it's like, if I'm running a packaging machine and I'm getting a ton of rework because the seals are bad or whatever the case may be, depending on how detailed you are in measuring some of the other things on throughput and so much, you can kind of skate around those a little bit. Anybody that's been in the manufacturing world knows what I'm talking about there. But true measurement of OEE, you're really trying to see, is this piece of equipment doing it, or comparing pieces of equipment. The other one that is probably, if you're a maintenance technician or a maintenance manager or a plant manager and you're listening to this podcast, probably the most common thing that you're held accountable to are these next couple ones. And one is production downtime. And so maintenance teams are held accountable to the point where maintenance teams will want to argue, what are they really, how do you measure the downtime? Is that really downtime or what is the case may be? But in a nutshell, the sum, production downtime is the sum of all downtime during a specified time frame. So that includes planned and unplanned downtime. So planned downtime would be, for example, if I'm running a slicer and I know that every 2 hours we got to sharpen the blade, it's planned, but the line's still down. And so it kind of gets factored in there. It's a little different than unplanned, but still it's time that line is not running because we've got to do this piece of maintenance on it. So, it's clearly one of the most common measurements, for a maintenance team specifically. I mean, they're the ones that own it. Even though you can have operator error that oftentimes creates downtime that the maintenance team gets to own. And so,
like a quarterback that does an interception that was tipped,
exactly,
or the guy dropped the ball and it deflects into the quarterback gets the interception.
Yes, believe me, I have sat in many a production meeting, the production supervisor and the maintenance supervisor arguing over whose fault it was. So downtime has a large effect on plant performance. One of the things that when we're out selling what we do, which is providing a contingent workforce to supplement maintenance teams, we talk a lot. One of the things we talk to facilities about is, well, what's an hour of downtime cost you? Because if you're looking at me bringing you help, there's a cost involved in that. We like to say, and it sounds a little salesy sometimes, is it a cost or is it an investment? And so, but if that downtime, I just referred to a minute ago, the podcast we did earlier today on the smart manufacturing, Jake had alluded to that, a lot of the plants, they said, it's $5,000 an hour, or $10,000 an hour, depending on how detailed your plan is and how big. We've heard even much bigger numbers.
Big numbers.
Either way, it adds up, quickly. And so anybody that's been in the maintenance world knows that there is nothing worse than unplanned downtime, which basically means a breakdown. You've got 20 people on a production line all looking or standing around staring at the maintenance team to get this line up and running. And so it's a common thing that happens in plants. And so, but the more of that breakdown, what this would refer to as unscheduled downtime, the more of that you're having is clearly an indication of the lack of PMs, preventive maintenance, or predictive maintenance planning. That as you evolve, as we see plants evolving more and more towards predictive maintenance, what do you? But the downtime numbers are going to get, they're indicators. The whole point of measuring all the things we said, safety, turnover for your people, and the OEE, and then the downtime is it's not just to have the data, but then what are we, what are we doing with it? And probably one of the biggest factors, Tim, we talk to plants all the time that say we're 6 months behind on our PM work. Well, they're not 6 months behind just because they're lazy. They're 6 months behind because they don't have the talent there. They're understaffed, and not having the talent and being understaffed is probably one of the biggest contributors to downtime in facilities.
Yeah, and you mentioned that 6 months behind on PMs. It's kind of a death spiral because when you have unplanned outages, in order to get anywhere close to your production quotas and goals, the first thing to go is, well, we're not going to be able to have that planned outage because we're trying to catch up from unplanned outages. So then it feeds off itself. Then you get further and further behind, which causes more unplanned outages. I mean, it's a sometimes companies just have to stop digging if they're in a hole and get the people in there you need. So another key indicator or measure is just simply throughput. How many widgets are you putting through the line? How many are you producing? Total number of goods or units produced in a specified time frame, per hour, per shift, per week, whatever it is. How many are you producing? We measure it here at our company. Throughput's a big, important part of what we do. It's an important part to any part of organization. So it's a common KPI to analyze rather, and kind of take a look at your equipment and production lines of your plant. Are you getting the throughput you need? Are you getting more efficiency? So anybody that's spent any time in a manufacturing environment or lived in it for many years, like Brett, target throughput, everybody knows. What's our number? What's our goal? What's our target? And it doesn't matter what you're measuring. Everybody knows it. Everybody on the plant floor knows that shift. We just talked to a guy day before yesterday who's coming from a production environment, and they knew when they showed up, this is how many units you got to get put through on this shift. And so their goal, and if he could become more efficient and get that done in 6 hours versus 8, then great.
Yep.
So throughput is a big deal. And if you miss it, it's everybody knows it and everybody's going to focus on it. That production supervisor you talked about, I guarantee he's going to be talking about it all the way up to the plant superintendent. And it's a real uncomfortable meeting to be in when you miss that throughput goal. But measuring it is a part of it. The other thing is, okay, if we're not hitting our throughput targets, why? And how can we? And so these data points are not an end to themselves. They are an indicator. KPIs, key performance indicator. They point to an issue. They don't solve the issue. That's where human capital comes in.
Yep.
Experience, automation, training, all the things we've talked about.
Yep, no doubt. So yeah, if you're really using the data, the throughput, which is, almost every, production facility is going to have a morning. Some will have, depending on the type of facility is, you may have these multiple times a day, a production meeting that's going to review this. And so that throughput is typically going to be the downtime. Then they start to dig into that further to look at, is this an equipment issue? Are we having an equipment issue? It could also be, there's other factors, as we all know. It could be raw material. It could be a variety of these things.
Right.
But if that throughput number is consistently, not hitting the number, and assuming that everybody's agreed this is an achievable number. It's like we said, KPIs here, Tim, for what we do, and we all agree over time, this is an achievable number. So if we're not hitting it, why aren't we? This is the world that the manufacturing teams live in. So how can you impact those measurables? And we talked about it a minute ago about the people side. Well, the good news is they're really the same measure, but the same things kind of impact both. If you we talked about it a minute ago, if you want to impact your performance, just like impact your people, the ongoing skills and safety training. So upskilling your employees, having a safe environment, all of these things lead to, I know people look at it and they think, well, how does safety make us more efficient? It makes us safer. But it really, when you have an unsafe environment, it's a very hectic culture. And it has a huge impact on the way that facility just operates.
Sure it does.
Type of thing. And
Yep.
so having the right skills, being fully staffed, this is a little self-serving from our standpoint, but it is so, there's nothing more true. I mean, having a high turnover rate, not being able to retain your employees, or being underskilled or not having enough talent there has a huge impact on the performance, on the culture, on all the people, the burnout. We talk about those kinds of things. So again, those things all feed into the culture. And then you can get into the more practical things as you're looking at the OEE numbers that you've set a target, or your production downtime, or your throughput. Then you can really start to look at things like eliminating choke points or bottlenecks in the facility, or, hey, where can we automate to improve this part of the process, or those types of things.
Yeah, exactly. And it leads, we mentioned again, smart manufacturing, the fourth industrial revolution. How can we bring in automation technology to cause us to be more efficient? So your people, measure your performance. There's things you can do about it. The third category is driven by, as Brett said, you get your people and you get your performance on point, the profit will follow. But there are some measures here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there are traditional financial metrics that are out there that are important. And as a business leader, we all need to understand what these are and what they measure. At the end of the day, your performance and your people are driving. If you're a company that's in a business for profit, this is how you measure that, bottom line. And there's a couple that we'll hit on here. A few have to do with your profit margin, your both gross and your net profit margin. Basically, how much are you making after you pay for everything? Your labor, your equipment, your capital, keeping the lights on, utilities, everything that goes into it. how much you make and after you consider cost. I mean, that's pretty much the bottom line measure if you're going to measure something, right? So another one is working capital, and it's how much liquidity do you have for day-to-day operations? How much working capital do you have to be able to manage your day-to-day operations? So a healthy company is going to have sufficient working capital to maintain their operations at the level they need to. They're not running that to the point where they're not able to do some of the things that you talked about, Brett. The other one that I'll talk about is debt to equity ratio. So how much are you leveraged? How much is your company leveraged? How much do you have to finance itself or yourself as a company owner using equity versus debt? What's your solvency look like? And, right now we're in the middle of taking a look around at our culture and our economy, banking, and the ability to have access to finances. The interest rates, I mean, the Fed just jacked them up again, another, quarter point yesterday? Yep. When you're reading this, it'll probably be a week or so ago, or hearing this. So cost of money is going up, and the amount of debt and how you leverage that is really going to become a critical thing to think about, and you have to leverage that in big time so that you can do some of these things moving into to keep yourself competitive.
No, for sure. So, yeah, I think it made sense for us to, there are measurables for profit. Profit, as we often say, profit's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And so, you as a manufacturing facility, sometimes you can look at it and go, well, we're here, we're making this, we're making these widgets, these things. Well, the truth of it is the business is there to make money, to generate profit. And so the what you're making is just the
means to an end.
The means to the end.
Yeah.
And so we think the profit matters. We know for most of you that are listening to this, you would agree that a profitable company can do so much more for its people.
Exactly.
And to invest in
safety,
smart technology and the safety and and all of the things that make that facility run better. So these things are really critical measurements. It may not be so much the ones that the maintenance manager, who we deal with a lot, or the general manager who would be dealing with a lot of these as well. But so things like inventory turnover. So, you don't want, we were just talking about it, and we're referring to another podcast a couple of times here, but the ability to really downsize your inventory and turn things quicker has become a much more, as facilities have become more lean and more smart manufacturing, they can more custom make. And that's, so the ability to turn over, because inventory costs money, it's sitting there. And then just your overall, when we talk about the OEE, reasons you measure that is you're looking for a return on equity and assets. So if I've spent this money on this piece of equipment and it's constantly underperforming, I'm not getting the return on the equity and the assets, which is something, as from the private side, we got to be looking at. Then things like cash flow. We talked about that Tim. It's I've been on both sides of that. I've been in some really tight cash flows where I wasn't sure on Thursday how we were going to make payroll on Friday. Feels a lot better when you can manage, when you don't have to worry about it on that day. So operating, knowing that and looking at that, it just changes the environment. At the end of the day, like I just said, companies are created to have a healthy bottom line, to make money. That's not an evil thing. That's not a bad thing.
No.
It's the opposite. That's what allows you to hire more people and to take care of your people and have a safer work environment. All of those things. When the bottom line's not healthy, it has a big impact on other things.
Yeah. So, we hit on just a few, and obviously we talked about that NetSuite article that had 70 something measures. So we only have about 68-ish to go, and that'll be on part 2 of the podcast that Brett's going to do by himself. But no, we're not going to go into all of those. But the point we're trying to do with this podcast is talk about, everybody knows that they have metrics and numbers and tons of data coming down. As a matter of fact, more data than ever before, more things to measure than ever before. The point of this is, what are you really measuring? What question are you trying to answer that's going to help drive your organization, improve the quality of life for your employees, and give you a competitive advantage. So don't measure everything, measure the right thing, whether it be efficiency or cost or profitability or compliance. There's HR measures, there's customer experience, lean manufacturing, and on and on and on. And we would just say it's far less important to measure everything than it is to measure the right thing. And I always start with measures. I'm like, what question are you trying to answer? What ultimate question are you trying to answer? And if you don't really have a firm grip on that, then you probably are just measuring data for the sake of measuring it. And a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, a lot of the measurements in a lot of plants and facilities, because we've always measured this, it's something we've always measured. So it becomes almost like a measuring stick unto itself that really doesn't have a lot of bearing in what they do day to day. So it's interesting how that happens. Some traditions just become, so ask yourself why, and make sure what you're measuring really matters. So that's
well, I would agree 100%, Tim. I will assure you that there is many a plant manager, general manager, business manager, whatever, that has a half a dozen reports on their desk right now that they get every day and they don't even look at them. And so you just get into this pattern of just this more and more information. I have my oldest son, has his PhD in information sciences, which, big fancy word, to basically the reason he got into that was he was very intrigued by this big data. And him and I have conversations to this day, or especially when he was still in school. He's a professor now, but is the real question is, okay, we have all of this data, but how do we use it? What are we going to do with it? We're collecting so much information. Right. But if you are collecting, and we've narrowed it down from a manufacturing, to, like I said, to 5 out of the 73 potential. Not that some of those others aren't clearly have some value depending on how you want to use them. But I think the biggest one, we would never recommend that you not measure, because if you don't know where you're flying the plane, there's a good chance you're going to crash. Right. And so you need the data, but as important, you then need to, if the data continues to tell you that we're underperforming, and whether that's in safety, or whether that's in retention rates or turnover, or whether that's in performance, ignoring that information where you just basically continue to ignore it, that has a huge impact on your culture. And as we talk about, Tim, once your culture erodes, it will erode your bottom line. Absolutely. And so they are connected. I use we'll be a little bit past the New Year's resolution time, but if you make the decision to I got to lose weight because I got to get healthier, and every day you weigh yourself, but you don't ever change your eating habits, I mean, what's the point?
Well, you obviously got a broken scale. That's a problem I have in my house. It's mismeasuring my weight.
Yes,
possibly the chicken enchiladas I ate last night.
So, the bottom line is taking a data-driven approach to operations through real-time KPIs and dashboard allows you, the manufacturer, to focus on the business, not in the business. If you're not measuring, the tendency is you're just constantly in the weeds, putting out fires and that type of thing. The goal for anybody that lives in the manufacturing world is to be able to step back a little bit and to really see this thing. There's nothing better than to look down on the production floor and seeing everything run smoothly. It's a great feeling. And so,
I had a boss I used to work for, and I've taken this on, and he would just say, "So what?" You'd bring him something, and he'd say, "So what?" Yeah. And it came across flippant initially, but what he was trying to say is, what's the why?
Yeah.
I do this all this. Here's how this, this project is going. Here's the measures, et cetera. And, here's how we're managing the budget or whatever. And so what? So he was always trying to force us to be able to explain why it mattered. And that's a level beneath. So that's what we're trying to encourage you here, is to go a little deeper. Don't just take a look at a number and go, it was 75 yesterday, it's 73 today, so that's not good, right? Well, what is it measuring in the first place? So ask yourself why, ask what the so what is, and and get to a handful of measures that really help you manage your company the best. Don't get caught up in all the numbers. So we just touched on a few measures today. The things you can measure are limitless. Our company is you would think a pretty simplistic model, but we have an unlimited number of data points that we can measure here. And trying to measure the correct ones is a daily challenge to us to look at that. So we hope we drove home some crucial insights today. Ronald Reagan is credited with a phrase, I don't know if he said it or not, but this idea of trust but verify. So you have to be able to, another colloquialism is, if you're going to expect, then you have to inspect. So it's an accountability thing as well. Trust but verify, and people, even though they say they don't like it, people like to be held accountable. They really do. And it's important that we as leaders understand that if it matters, you better measure it and then do something about it. So in closing today, we hope this brought a little bit of value to you and maybe caused you to think a little bit about what you're measuring today. Take a hard look at those numbers, go down through every one of them and go like, why am I measuring this? What's the impact? When was the last time I took any action based on that number? And it's like your wardrobe, Brett. Every year you go through and I haven't worn this shirt in a year. Maybe it's time I got rid of it. So take a hard look at that and maybe it'll help you get a little bit more efficient at your job. So till next time, we really appreciate you listening to us on the Skillwork Forum. Hope this helped you. We always want to give a shout out to a couple of things. Number one, a show that we sponsor. It's on Amazon Prime now. It's called Texas Boys Outdoors. We love these guys. We love their mission. They take guys out hunting and fishing, guys and gals out hunting and fishing out into the great outdoors, special needs, first responders, military veterans. They get them out there and they show them a good time. We're proud to sponsor that show. Our core values line up with them. And also we have another podcast here that we produce called The Proud Skill Worker. Whereas this podcast is more towards leaders and business leaders and people that are interested in how to drive their business. That podcast is much more interested in really what's the voice of the skilled tradesman. So we hope that you'll take a listen to those. And next time, join us here on the Skillwork Forum. Talk to you later.